War of the Worlds. The War of the Worlds.
Right then, chapter 8, so it is. So on we go in with Dead London. So get yourselves ready for this chapter. It's a great chapter. If you've got yourself a map, get your map open, have a look at the map and chart the journey as he goes through Dead London. It's a fascinating chapter. It's apocalyptic. It's the sort of thing you'd see if you're in a sort of horror film. And let me just mute that for a second because I've got all sorts of things in my ears. It's horrendous. Right, so Dead London, let's be going. Now, just a first point before we even get started is the chapter title, Dead London. Very significant. This is the capital. We've been working towards this the whole book long. We've been getting incrementally closer and closer to London, the centre of the capital of a capital city. So in the centre of the British Empire as well, of course. And keep it contextual, keep it contemporary about the people at the time this was being written. So that's very important. You've now got the name of the capital in the chapter heading. It feels very climactic. Now that's a structural feature because this is building towards a climax. Of course it is. Any novel would do the same. It's building towards a climax. And here you've got this climax here. Now there's still 3 chapters to go, but here, you know, this is sort of, it's climactic, but then at the same time it's dead London. So you've sort of got that anticlimax as well. You've got that sort of apocalyptic bathos, I suppose you'd call it there. So there's a bit of language as well with the bathos of the word dead juxtaposed against the word London in the title. Lots going on there just in the very chapter title. So if any extracts come up from this chapter in the exam, not that it's a very long chapter, I mean the extract would be about as long as the chapter. Oh no, not quite. It's a little bit longer than I thought. But if it does come up in the exam, you'd want to be talking about or writing about the title of the chapter itself, Dead London. It's anticlimactic, it's oxymoronic, because those 2 words don't really go hand in hand, and yet there they are juxtaposed against one another. Lots to say just in the very 2 words. I've not got a great deal to say about the number 8, mind you, but the other bit, Dead London, loads to say about it. Right, let's get started then, shall we? Into chapter 8, the body, the drink and meat of the thing. Let's get going.
8. Dead London. After I had parted from the artilleryman, I went down the hill, and by the high street across the bridge to Fulham. The red weed was tumultuous at that time, and nearly choked the bridge roadway, but its fronds were already whitened in patches by the spreading disease that presently removed it so swiftly. At the corner of the lane that runs to Putney Bridge Station, I found a man lying. He was as black as a sweep, with the black dust alive, but helplessly and speechlessly drunk. I could get nothing from him but curses and furious lunges at my head. I think I should have stayed by him, but for the brutal expression on his face.
So what we've got here then is the toll it's taking on humanity. This is life under the Martians, and this is the toll it's taking on the humanity left behind. Now, the first thing I want to say about this paragraph, the couple of paragraphs, is the use of proper nouns. So look at High Street, look at Fulham, look at Putney Bridge, and as you get further down, you'll see all sorts of Walham Green, you'll notice Brompton, you've got Fulham Road, and so it goes on. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not bored by the book. I think it's a really good book. I mean, it's not Pride and Prejudice by any means, but I think it's a good book. I'm just a wee bit tired, and I think it's just talking to the wall here. I sort of bore myself with it really, so I do apologise. Now look, he's using a simile here. H.G. Wells using a simile. He was as black as a sweep with the black dust. So he's using a simile there to describe this man as like a chimney sweeper. So obviously, he would be covered in soot from the chimneys. He'd be black as black as you like, black as a sweep. And so that's a simile, because that's a language point. Now, this is an anaphoric reference. It's looking back in the novel to something which has already been mentioned. And the thing that's been mentioned is the black dust. Now, the black dust is the aftermath of the toxic gas, the black smoke that the Martians were piping out to destroy all living things. So this is a link back to what the Martians have done and how they've sort of annihilated London. So the black dust itself is toxic. That links back to the semantic field of the chapter heading, which is Dead London. So you've got this semantic field here, which is a language point. But, and this is the toll it's taken on humanity, is that he's alive, but he's helplessly and speechlessly drunk. Maybe he's drunk on alcohol, maybe he's drunk on the effects of the dust. We don't know. But there he is, swearing and shouting and making furious lunges at my head. It sounds like a Saturday night in Glasgow, to be fair. And then he talks about the brutal expression of his face. Now, this is how humanity has turned out. Now, we've talked about this before, but this is, excuse me, this is about where humanity turns on itself. It's where humanity become the monsters. It's about humanity, people, men and women becoming worse than the Martians themselves, worse than the zombies in an apocalyptic film. It's where humanity turns ugly. And that's what this is doing. That's very realistic. That's what happens, and that's what what we imagine would happen, because people get greedy and people get unpleasant, and we've seen it a wee bit in the lockdown, haven't we? We've seen a few episodes of things getting a wee bit ugly. But by and large, I think people have shown the good side, really. But that's what we're looking at here. So let's move on a bit further.
There was black dust along the roadway from the bridge onwards, and it grew thicker in Fulham. The streets were horribly quiet. I got food, sour, hard and mouldy, but quite eatable, in a baker's shop here. Some way towards Walham Green, the streets became clear of powder, and I passed a white terrace of houses on fire. The noise of the burning was an absolute relief. Going on towards Brompton, the streets were quiet again.
So you've got the absence of life here, and the fact that he's glad to hear some fires burning because it's something living, it's something doing something. And he's just sort of horrified by the absence of any action in life. Now, look out here for the proper nouns. We mentioned them before. Oh, dearie me. I need a cup of coffee, I think, to get me jump started here. Yeah, the proper nouns there: Walham Green, Brompton. Now, if you've got your map, have a good look at the map here. We're in southwest London here, as you'd expect. We're kind of travelling in a northeasterly direction in a diagonal line from Horsehall Common. If you go right the way back down to Woking, but we're near London, so we're in the sort of South Kensington area of Brompton and Putney. He's leaving Putney, isn't he? So you might find, I don't know if you look around the house, you might find you've got a wee map of, like a travel map of London if you've been to London, and you might have one just like I've got a few of those pop-out maps that kind of open up and it pops out. Quite a handy thing to have. And you'll see, if you look at expanded view, you'll see that you've got South Kensington there, and you'll see some of the real landmark features. It's very important for you to do that. And if you've not got a map, it's not a problem. You can go, as you know, you can open up another tab, can't you? You can have a wee look at Google Maps or whatever else you want to look at and find it on the web. But the point is that he's going. These place names are getting more and more central to London. So going on towards Brompton. Now Brompton's at the end of the King's Road in Chelsea, and the King's Road it's called the King's Road because it used to be where the King would go into central London along that way. And it's a very fashionable street now, full of very expensive boutique shops and fashion shops and the Saatchi Gallery. And very expensive eateries and cafes and things. I go there myself. I go to the Royal Brompton Hospital about once or twice a year. And I always like to pop into to some of the delicatessens on the street. I like to pay about £10 for a sausage roll. I think it's great if you can spend. Why go to Greggs and get one for a quid when you can pay about £10 for the same thing. It's worth doing if you ever get a chance to go down there. Yeah, so let's move on then. So proper nouns, getting closer to London, central London, so sense of incrementum there as well, but also the absence of life and the fact that this is living up to the name of the chapter, which is Dead London.
Here I came once more upon the black powder in the streets and upon the dead bodies. I saw altogether about a dozen in the length of the Fulham Road. They had been dead many days, so that I hurried quickly past them. The black powder covered them over and softened their outlines. One or two had been disturbed by dogs. Where there was no black powder, it was curiously like a Sunday in the city, with closed shops, the houses locked up, and the blinds drawn, the desertion and the stillness.
Now, just to clarify that, the Sunday in the City reference there, and it's got a little wee footnote there, so you can have a look at the back of the book for the appendix if you wish, but I'll talk you through it now. You probably know this already, but the city refers to the original city of London. It refers to the Roman city of London, really. It's a square mile, and it's over towards the east end of London. It's the sort of business district, the banking district. And if you ever go outside of sort of 9 to 5 hours or Sunday, or, the weekend, you'll see it's absolutely like a ghost town. There's nothing there. There's very few shops. It's all just financial businesses and banks, and they're all closed. And so it is like a ghost town, really. And that's still the case now, as it ever was. Although there's more tourists around now, I suppose, and there's probably more in the way of wee shops and cafes and things. But even still, there's very little there until you get out to that square mile. It's a very packed business centre in London. So that's what it means. It means that it's just deserted, really, and nothing's there.
In some places, plunderers had been at work, but rarely at other than the provision and wine shops. A jeweller's window had been broken open in one place, but apparently the thief had been disturbed, and a number of gold chains and a watch were scattered on the pavement.
Now, if you blink, you'd miss this point, but it's a wee socialist point here. The fact that all that's important now is like provisions of food, greengrocers, bakers, and wine shops. Well, that's, if there's one thing humanity knows how to do, it's how to escape itself, isn't it, and drink itself into oblivion. So people want to have their wine, want to have their drink, and they want to have something to eat. They want to get into that Greg's, the bakers, and get themselves that sausage roll. What they don't need is the expensive things, the commodities that in normal times are very expensive. So the gold and the gold chains, a watch, they're not being taken because they have no value anymore. There's no need. What has more value is things that sustain life. So actually, there's an interesting point there about how when these things happen, capitalism possibly it changes, and that the sort of financial dynamic changes in a situation like this, because actually what good is gold? What good are diamonds when you've got, Martians bearing down on you with a heat ray or a toxic black smoke? It's no good. So what people need more is food, and they need drink to escape all the hideousness. So they're getting drunk where possible, and they're eating their food to stay alive. But the things that we normally consider to be treasure and precious things actually have no value anymore and are left scattered across the pavement. Can you imagine that now? Can you imagine walking down the King's Road in Chelsea? How long it'd last if you spilled some gold across the street? It'd be up within, people would go out before it even hit the floor, be taken away. But of course, in this situation, there are few people there, and the few people who are there, they aren't bothered about gold, the diamonds. It means nothing to them, that there's no value in it. So the social dynamic has changed. That's an important thematic point that you want to write down.
I did not trouble to touch them. Further on was a tattered woman in a heap on a doorstep. The hand that hung over her knee was gashed and bled down her rusty brown dress, and a smashed magnum of champagne formed a pool across the pavement. She seemed asleep, but she was dead.
And there we go. There's the toll it's taking on humanity. You've got this woman here that she's drunk, or she's drunk some of this magnum of champagne. Now, a magnum is a huge bottle. It's a bigger bottle than a normal standard 750 milliliter size bottle. It's a bigger, I can't remember how many milliliters it is. Might be about 1,000, might be a litre. Maybe bigger than that. I can't remember. It's a big bottle of champagne. And, you can get them for celebrations and things like that. And, but look at that. She looks asleep, but she's actually dead. So people are not getting the funerals. People are just being left in the streets to die. This is the aftermath of an apocalypse. And I think that the description here of gashed and bled and rusty brown dress, there's a whole sort of, and smashed magnum, gashed and smashed. I don't know. It just sounds violent, doesn't it? There's a semantic field being created there, partly through rhyme and word association, and partly through the word choices themselves, like gashed and bled and smashed. And even a rusty brown dress, I don't know, it just sounds sort of like it's like the blood is going to go on the dress almost. It just has that effect in my mind, certainly, that and tattered woman in a heap on a doorstep. It just sounds violent and unpleasant, and of course it is. And there she is. She looked asleep, but she actually did.
The further I penetrated into London, the profounder grew the stillness. But it was not so much the stillness of death. It was the stillness of suspense, of expectation. At any time, the destruction that had already singed the northwestern borders of the metropolis and had annihilated Ealing and Kilburn might strike among these houses and leave them smoking ruins. It was a city condemned and derelict.
So, you've got a wee bit of hyperbaton here in that paragraph. The further I penetrated into London, the profounder grew the stillness. So not only it'd say it got more still the further I went into London, but he's decided to use hyperbaton to flip the words around and put the word stillness towards the end of the clause. And he's done it again in the next little bit as well, and particularly towards the end of that paragraph. He says, it was a city condemned and derelict. Now, most of us would say it was a derelict and condemned city, but he's flipped it round using hyperbaton, which is a structural technique. Now, I always get confused. Is it structural? Is it language? I mean, to be honest, and I'll tell you the truth here, and I'll talk you through this when I see you again back in the classroom. There's no such thing as a language and structural technique. They're all just rhetorical techniques. They're all just how you use words. But I know Mr. Dawson's divided it down into structure and language to make it easier for you to make sure that you're writing about the right things. But to tell you the truth, they're all the same thing. But this one here, I mean, if I had to sort of, give you a category for it, a genre, I'd call it structure, because it's flipping the word order around, so it must be structure. But then again, it's words that have been flipped around, so that's language. So bit of language, bit of structure. To be honest with you, it doesn't matter, as long as in the exam you're writing about the effect of it. They don't really care if you're writing about, if you say this is a structural technique or this is a language technique. They don't care. What they care about is, do you understand the effect of it? Now, the effect of it here is to push the important words towards the end of the sentence. So in this case, the word derelict and the word stillness. Now, they're both in a sort of similar semantic field, so it's actually working together there to create an overwhelming effect of a city which is no longer inhabited. It is, as the title suggests, dead London. Now, he also uses a fair few proper nouns there. He talks about London itself, he talks about Ealing and Kilburn, and then we go on to talk about South Kensington in the next paragraph. So lots of proper nouns there as well, just to re-emphasise whereabouts we are and to give it that sense of authenticity. And I hope you've got your maps out there looking at the places, and you'll see where we start to go through London at this point and walking through the streets of London.
In South Kensington, the streets were clear of dead and of black powder. It was near South Kensington that I first heard the howling. It crept almost imperceptibly upon my senses. It was a sobbing alternation of two notes. Ooh, 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 keeping on perpetually.
Ooh-la. Ooh-la. So what we've got here is a little bit of direct speech on the part of the Martians here, and he's put that in quotation marks to show that it's the Martians speaking. Then, I mean, the effect of that is that we're hearing the Martians for the first time, so we're getting what's called direct speech, and that's a structural technique, giving us direct speech. And it's unusual, isn't it? Because these are unfamiliar words. Oola, 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 as he says in the audiobook. So by using these strange, unfamiliar words, not English words, or indeed Scottish words, they're unsettling for a reader, because they're just sort of these undulating vowel sounds. So you've got a little bit of structure there in terms of direct speech, but you've also got the language being unfamiliar language, and that unsettles the reader, particularly given that it's carrying on perpetually and repeating the same word. So there's another structural point there, the repetition at the word as well is worth making note of.
When I passed streets that ran northward, it grew in volume, and houses and buildings seemed to deaden and cut it off again. It came in a full tide down Exhibition Road. I stopped, staring towards Kensington Gardens, wondering at this strange, remote wailing. It was as if that mighty desert of houses had found a voice for its fear and solitude.
So jumping the gun a little bit there, we don't know in the novel that it's the Martian, the voice here, but of course it is. But he's saying it's more like the houses themselves had found a voice for their fear and their solitude. So a couple of things here. You've got these proper nouns of Exhibition Road, and you'll be able to see it on your maps that I'm sure you've got out on the desk in front of you. I'm sure you can see the maps, and I'm sure you're tracing with your fingers the journey that he's making as he goes north at this point throughout London, up through Kensington and into Chelsea. So Exhibition Road, you'll have been to Exhibition Road. I'm sure you'll have seen the Victorian Albert Museum, and you'll have been to the Natural History Museum, you'll have been to the Science Museum. That's all on Exhibition Road. It's a huge road. And there he is, staring towards Kensington Gardens. So he's going north in that way into Hyde Park. There's like a sort of a little bit of grass that you go through the Kensington Gardens first, then you go into Hyde Park itself, and that's the way he's heading. And you'll see that very, very soon. Now, he also uses some figurative language. Look at this. It was as if that mighty desert of houses. Was it really a desert of houses? Of course not. So it's a metaphor. So a desert of houses had found a voice for its fear and solitude. Well, a couple of things there. The metaphor of desert, meaning somewhere abandoned and nothing living. That links back to the title of the chapter, Dead London. And also fear and solitude. Well, don't they work together as a companion set of words? I think they probably do. I think you could almost say it's hendiadys for fear and solitude. They're very similar words, and they have a very similar effect. I think I'd tie them together as a compound phrase there, as an example of hendiadys. Now let's get back to the story and that funny old sound again. Let's look forward to hearing him say that. You ready? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oola! 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 Wailed that superhuman note. Great waves of sound sweeping down the broad, sunlit roadway, between the tall buildings on each side.
You thought I had a funny voice, and now the narrator of the audiobook's making some very strange noises indeed. Well, so you got the repetition there again of that funny noise, that superhuman note. Great waves of sound. That's a metaphor, isn't it? This idea of waves of sound sweeping down the broad, sunlit roadway. So it starts off as a metaphor, great waves of sound. And then it extends, it stretches into an extended metaphor because it's now sweeping down the broad, sunlit roadway. So it would have just been a metaphor if it was waves of sound, but because he stretches that metaphor and carries that idea on, it becomes an extended metaphor. And this is still language points. It's all language, but it's an extended metaphor. So that's a nice thing to write down, isn't it? Extended metaphor. What a nice thing to write. Personally, I'd write it above that bit where it says wailed that superhuman note. That little bit of space there after solitude. I'd write it down there if it was me. But, each to their own. I turned northward, marvelling, towards the iron gates of Hyde Park. I had half a mind to break into the Natural History Museum and find my way up to the summits of the towers in order to see across the park. But I decided to keep to the ground, where quick hiding was possible, and so went up the Exhibition Road. All the large mansions on each side of the road were empty and still, and my footsteps echoed against the sides of the houses. At the top, near the park gate, I came upon a strange sight. A bus, overturned, and the skeleton of a horse picked clean. I puzzled over this for a time, and then went on to the bridge over the Serpentine. The voice grew stronger and stronger, though I could see nothing above the housetops on the north side of the park, save a haze of smoke to the northwest. More use of proper nouns at this point. So whenever you see a capital letter and you see, these place names, you'll see it in the next paragraph with Regent's Park, Oxford Street, Marble Arch, just a quick glance down the page there, and Oxford Street, Marble Arch, Baker Street, Portman Square, Regent's Park. Again, you'll see it's littered, if I can use that metaphor, littered with proper nouns. Now, these really are places which are on your road map, and if you've got a map of London, as I say, a little touristy map of London, these are places that are on there. Hyde Park, of course, is in the southwest, sort of west corner of central London, and then you've got it's heading more towards the centre, and so a sense of incrementum, because here we're very much in the centre. We are literally in the centre of London at this point. So it's a sense of it's been building towards this. The whole novel's been building to this point. All the sort of edging closer from Horsell Common, getting slightly further east, slightly further north, heading up. And it's always been incrementum, getting closer and closer to London itself, Richmond, Kew Gardens. These are all places that are getting closer to London. And now we're in London itself. It couldn't get any more exciting, could it? And then, yet at the same time, there's a sort of anticlimax because there's nobody there. It's empty. As the chapter title says, it's dead London. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't even make sense. It's dead London. London shouldn't be dead. It should be vibrant and living.
Ooh, 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 cried the voice, coming, as it seemed to me, from the district about Regent's Park. The desolating cry worked upon my mind. The mood that had sustained me passed. The wailing took possession of me. I found I was intensely weary, footsore, and now and again hungry and thirsty.
So you got hendiadys there with hungry and thirsty, coming at the end of an asyndetic list, intensely weary. The guy that pronounces it as weary, but he doesn't mean weary, he means weary, which means tired. Weary means frightened. He doesn't mean that, he means weary, which is tired. But the narrator pronounced it wrong. Easily done, I mean, it's no easy doing voices, that's for certain. Intensely weary, footsore, and now and again, there we go, now again, hungry and thirsty. So an asyndetic list of experiences there for him, and then lastly with some hendiadys of hungry and thirsty, all, essentially meaning the same thing.
It was already past noon. Why was I wandering alone in this city of the dead? Why was I alone when all London was lying in state and in its black shroud?
That's a wee play on words there with the black shroud. It's talking about, if you talk about lying in state and a black shroud, that's three words there: state, black, and shroud, that all are in the semantic field of death and funerals. And so that's what he means. The whole place is in mourning because it's as if everything's died. And yet, there's a play on words because, of course, it's black because of the black smoke and the black dust that's left behind it. So there's a bit of a play on words, a bit of language play. Who doesn't like a bit of language play? So that's what we've got there, a play on words, a double meaning. The black shroud, it's shrouded in black dust and the toxic gas, the remnants of the toxic gas. But that also gives it a sort of a funereal. And that's a good word to use, actually. I'd definitely write that down. It's like, well, let me spell it for you. F-U-N. Oh, I can't remember. F-U-N. I have to write it down. Just bear with me 1 sec. I'll just write this down. Does this pen work? Funereal. That's the one. What a funny word. F-U-N-E-R-E-A-L. So like funeral, but not quite funeral. Funereal. And it's a real word. Funereal. It's a funereal word. And it means things that have the aspect of a funeral. They sort of feel a bit ghastly and a bit sad and a bit morbid. And London feels very morbid at this time. Feels like an abandoned city, a dead city, as the chapter title calls it. So just to sort of round up there, the language here is very funereal. Funereal is an adjective that you'd use to describe the language and the imagery being used. So the language here, the semantic field, is very funereal.
I felt intolerably lonely. My mind ran on old friends that I had forgotten for years. I thought of the poisons in the chemist's shops, of the liquors the wine merchants stored, I recalled the two sudden creatures of despair who, so far as I knew, shared the city with myself.
And you won't have failed to notice the asyndetic list there of the way his mind runs on, and he thinks back to the poisons of the chemist's shops, the liquors that the wine merchants stored. You got this syndetic list of the activity, the way things used to be. You remember when shops used to be open? I know it's hard to remember even now. As in the lockdown, it's hard to remember what the place was like when people could walk around and go to the shops and go to the cafes and, go to the cinema. And that's what he's saying. He's in London, but nothing's open. It's like lockdown.
I came into Oxford Street, by the Marble Arch, and here again were black powder and several bodies, and an evil, ominous smell from the gratings of the cellars of some of the houses. I grew very thirsty after the heat of my long walk. With infinite trouble, I managed to break into a public house and get food and drink. I was weary after eating, and went into the parlour behind the bar and slept on a black horsehair sofa I found there. I woke to find that dismal howling still in my ears. Ooh-la! 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 It was now dusk, and after I had routed out some biscuits and a cheese in the bar, there was a meat safe, but it contained nothing but maggots. I wandered on through the silent residential squares to Baker Street. Portman Square is the only one I can name, and so came out at last upon Regent's Park. And as I emerged from the top of Baker Street, I saw far away, over the trees in the clearness of the sunset, the hood of the Martian giant from which this howling proceeded. I was not terrified. I came upon him as if it were a matter of course. I watched him for some time, but he did not move. He appeared to be standing and yelling for no reason that I could discover.
So in terms of structure here, you've got a wee bit of narrative progression in the sense that he's heading towards the Martian. He's walking towards the source of the ula 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 sound. So there's narrative progression there. There's we need to keep turning the pages to find out what happens when he gets to the Martian. There's a sense of tension here. And I think along with that, you've got a sense of incrementum. That with every step he takes, he's getting nearer and nearer to the source of the sound. So there's incrementum. They're both structural points. They both serve the same purpose, which is to increase the narrative tension. Always increasing the narrative tension.
I tried to formulate a plan of action. That perpetual sound of ooh, 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 confused my mind. Perhaps I was too tired to be very fearful. Certainly I was more curious to know the reason of this monotonous crying than afraid. I turned back away from the park and struck into Park Road, intending to skirt the park, went along under shelter of the terraces and got a view of this stationary, howling Martian from the direction of St. John's Wood. A couple of 100 yards out of Baker Street, I heard a yelping chorus and saw first a dog with a piece of putrescent red meat in his jaws coming headlong towards me, and then a pack of starving mongrels in pursuit of him. He made a wide curve to avoid me, as though he feared I might prove a fresh competitor. As the yelping died away down the silent road, the wailing sound of ooh-la, ooh-la reasserted itself.
Now this is a really important point where we get down to street level here, so we can very accurately, almost down to the street, down to the actual house and the address on the street at certain points. You can look at where he is in London at this time. It's very, very accurate. And the reason, of course, is to make this more credible, authentic, to frighten his readers in the late 19th century. He wanted this to seem like a real account, so to make it real, he puts in real places, real. He's walked this journey himself. He's written this as a result of research, and he stood in these streets and he stood looking up at Primrose Hill and over at St John's Wood, and you can see where these places are. So get yourselves a map if you haven't done already. For goodness sake, get a map and have a wee look and see where he is and where he's looking towards. Now, there's a little bit of foreshadowing here as well. This dog running along with a piece of putrescent red meat in his jaws. Now, when I first read this many, many years ago, I just thought it was meat, just, red meat. But I suppose the pre-modifier, the adjective that pre-modifies it is putrescent, which is just a very vivid red. And I should have known better, really, but of course it's foreshadowing the fact that these dogs are eating the Martian meat. And we find this out in a few pages' time, but it's foreshadowing what happens. And the Martians have died because of the bacteria, but the dogs and the animals are eating the Martian meat. And we learn at the very end of the book that there's hardly any Martian meat left for the scientists to analyse because the dogs have eaten it all. I know. It's pretty horrific, but I guess that's realistic too.
I came upon the wrecked handling machine, halfway to St John's Wood station. At first, I thought a house had fallen across the road. It was only as I clambered among the ruins that I saw, with a start, this mechanical Samson lying with its tentacles bent and smashed and twisted among the ruins it had made.
Okay, so another metaphor here, the figurative description is a mechanical Samson. Now, I'm sure the eagle-eyed of you will have already been to the back of the book and had a look at what that footnote number 2 means, but I'll talk you through it anyway. So Samson was sort of a bit of a hero of the Israelites, and this is in the Bible, in the book of Judges, in the old Hebrew Bible. And Samson, you might have heard of Samson as a very strong character. He had great long hair, a bit like Mr. Dawson said. Everybody could have it cut, a really long hair. It made him very strong, and he could do incredible things. He was just a human, but he had sort of superhuman strength. So he could do things like he killed a lion with his bare hands at one point, and he took out a whole army of Philistines, and he just used the jawbone of a donkey as his only weapon. And if his hair was cut, then he lost all his strength. So of course, he was betrayed, and it was by his lover Delilah. So that you often hear the story Samson and Delilah. Delilah ordered a servant to have his hair cut while he was asleep, and of course the Philistines took him, arrested him while he was weak. And you know what they did? They gouged out his eyes. Can you believe that? They gouged out his eyes, and they made him work in a mill, grinding grain in a mill in the Gaza Strip. Well, while he's there, his hair starts to regrow, of course, and he prays and prays to God, and eventually gets his strength back, and he brings down the whole temple, and he kills all the Philistines, and he also kills himself as a suicide mission. And he brings the whole temple down on himself and on the Philistines, and he saves the Israelites. So that's a wee bit of information about him. So, I mean, that's a long-winded definition, but that's who Samson is. It's worth knowing that. And so this great mechanical Samson, this great superhuman, strong creature thing is there with its tentacles all bent. Imagine that, bent tentacles. Smashed and twisted. Hendiah is there, look, smashed and twisted among the ruins it made. The forepart was shattered. It seemed as if it had driven blindly straight at the house and had been overwhelmed in its overthrow. It seemed to me then that this might have happened by a handling machine escaping from the guidance of its Martian. I couldn't clamber among the ruins to see it, and the twilight was now so far advanced that the blood with which its seat was smeared and the gnawed gristle of the Martian that the dogs had left were invisible to me. So this is a sort of a fighting machine that's run amok. It's run off by itself without the Martian to control it, or after the Martian had died, and now been half eaten by dogs. So I'll let you get back to the story now, but that's a little bit of background there on Samson, so you're welcome for that. And now you're going to have to hear that whole section read again now, aren't you? Never mind. You might get something new.
The forepart was shattered. It seemed to me as if it had driven blindly straight at the house and had been overwhelmed in its overthrow. It seemed to me then that this might have happened by a handling machine escaping from the guidance of its Martian. I could not clamber among the ruins to see it, and the twilight was now so far advanced that the blood with which its seat was smeared and the gnawed gristle of the Martian that the dogs had left were invisible to me. Wondering still more at all that I had seen, I pushed on towards Primrose Hill.
Again, a sense of incrementum here, pushing on, narrative progression, pushing on towards Primrose Hill, more proper nouns there as well. So a sense of destination, a sense of going somewhere. The narrative is going somewhere. So narrative progression and I suppose a sense of incrementum as well.
Far away, through a gap in the trees, I saw a second Martian, as motionless as the first, standing in the park towards the zoological gardens, and silent. A little beyond the ruins, about the smashed handling machine, I came upon the red weed again, and found the Regent's Canal a spongy mass of dark red vegetation.
Again, if you've ever been to Regent's Park, and I've been to London Zoo, you've been to Regent's Park if you've been to London Zoo. It's in Regent's Park, and it's still there now. It's a very famous zoo, and it was there when H.G. Wells was there, of course, and called it Zoological Gardens. And just at the very north edge of Regent's Park, and the edge of the zoo, in fact, is the Regent's Canal. It's a fantastic canal. You can walk the whole way along, and you can go to Little Venice if you go right across the west. It's a fantastic journey. If you ever get the chance in the summer months to have a walk along Regent's Canal, I mean, I wouldn't walk along in the dark, don't get me wrong, but in a nice summer's day, it's a nice walk. There's like there's like river boats and barges there that have book shops and clothes shops actually on the boat. So you just climb on the boat and you can buy your clothes and your books and things and little cafes. It's a lovely wee place, but anyway, that's by the by.
As I crossed the bridge, the sound of ooh, 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 ceased. It was as if it were cut off. A silence came like a thunderclap.
Oh, what a lovely description. The silence came like a thunderclap. So that's an oxymoron, isn't it? Because how can the silence come like a thunderclap? So it's an unusual simile to use. It's a language point, a simile. An unusual simile to use because how can the silence come like a thunderclap? Thunderclaps are very loud. So it's like when people say the deafening silence. It's like an oxymoronic phrase. That's what H.G. Wells has done there to make us think about it in a different way, make us sort of sit up and reconsider the description. So that's that. That's a little bit of language for us there. And hopefully that's the last we hear, the ula ula. It's quite disturbing, isn't it, how many times we've heard that? Anyway, let's hope that's behind us now.
The dusky houses about me stood faint and tall and dim.
Oh, hello. Little wee bit of Polly Cinderton there you'll have recognised. Coincidence? Well, probably, but let's not let that stop us. The dusky houses about me stood faint and tall and dim. Faint and tall and dim. Polysyndeton there, polysyndetic list. And I suppose it's just to emphasise how big and how empty they seem all around him. Sort of intimidatingly big, and intimidatingly empty and abandoned and quiet.
The trees towards the park were growing black. All about me, the red weed clambered among the ruins, writhing to get above me in the dimness. Night, the mother of fear and mystery, was coming upon me.
My goodness me, what a description. So night being personified here. So this is all language. It's a figurative technique. Because personification is like a metaphor. It's the same thing really, but a bit more specific. So it's all figurative language. Night, the mother of fear and mystery. So you've got personification, calling night the mother of something. And then the hendiadys of fear and mystery works together to create this effect that night is being personified. Because night is coming, and with night comes fear and mystery and alienation, because you feel very alone at night, especially in a place like London when it's dead and there's nothing around anyway, even in the daylight hours. But by night it'd be very frightening, even more frightening. And so it's a sense of tension, dramatic tension again, narrative tension, and a sense of narrative progression, that what's going to happen in the night time to our narrator.
But while that voice sounded, the solitude, the desolation had been endurable. By virtue of it, London had still seemed alive, and the sense of life about me had upheld me. Then suddenly a change, the passing of something, I knew not what, and then a stillness that could be felt. Nothing but this gaunt quiet. London about me gazed at me spectrally.
So personifying London itself, London about me gazed at me spectrally. So I looked at him, looked at the whole range of him. It looked into his soul almost. So it's personifying not only the nighttime, but also London the place. And I think that's, if this comes up in the exam, I think you'd want to talk about the fact that London is almost like a character itself in this book. It's like London itself has been attacked. And I mean, the very title of this chapter, Dead London. I mean, London, a place can't be dead. A person can be dead. An animal can be dead, but a place can't be dead. So it's sort of oxymoronic, isn't it? But it's, so I suppose actually you'd say it might be worth flipping back to the start of the chapter and writing down personification, actually, because by saying Dead London, he's actually personified London in the very first 2 words of the chapter, just the title of the chapter. And now he's personified it again. London about me gazed at me spectrally. So actually London's so central to this book, it's almost like a living character. And that's a really important point you could make if the exam allows you to do that. And I think if it asks you anything about characters in the book, you could bring in London as a character in its own right, because the whole story heads towards London. It ends up in London. London lives and breathes and dies in this book. So London's a very important part of the book, so much so that it's personified as a character, because of course it's so close to so many people's hearts, and certainly was at the end of the 19th century and still is now. That's a good point to make.
The windows in the white houses were like the eye sockets of skulls.
So just a wee simile there, but a simile to help support the idea of personifying London. So all language points there, but the windows were like eye sockets of skulls, so that being dead, a dead body. So you've got this semantic field of death, a metaphor and a simile being working together to personify and create this sense of a dead creature, a dead person as London.
About me, my imagination found 1,000 noiseless enemies moving. Terror seized me, a horror of my temerity. In front of me, the road became pitchy black, as though it was tarred, and I saw a contorted shape lying across the pathway. I could not bring myself to go on. I turned down St. John's Wood Road and ran headlong from this unendurable stillness towards Kilburn. I hid from the night and the silence until long after midnight in the cabman's shelter in Harrow Road. But before the dawn my courage returned, and while the stars were still in the sky, I turned once more towards Regent's Park. I missed my way among the streets, and presently saw down a long avenue in the half-light of the early dawn, the curve of Primrose Hill. On the summit, towering up to the fading stars, was a third Martian, erect and motionless, like the others.
So structurally more sense of incrementum here. 3 Martians, 3 dead Martians, and he's heading towards Primrose Hill, which is the very northern tip, or sort of northern height, as the sort of London valley, if you want to call it a valley, kind of rises up out of itself. And I think we mentioned a few chapters, or maybe even towards the start of the book, that the trains travelling north from Euston Station, just next to King's Cross, used to have to be pulled up on a pulley system because the hill was so steep to get out of London, travelling north, that they used to pull them up. And if you're on the train now, you can, I mean, now they don't need to be pulled by pulleys that have got enough power in the engines, but it's a steep hill, and you go past Alexandra Palace and you can sort of rise up out of London. So look out for it next time you're down there. But yeah, and certainly worth having the map again. I keep banging on about the map, but really at this point we're down to actual buildings and roads, and you can actually chart where he is. I find that fascinating, as you can probably tell, and I think it's worth having a look so you can see the journey he makes. If nothing else, it helps to embed in your own mind because you've kind of travelled it with him. So it's kind of a useful revision technique because you sort of travelled along with him with your finger on the map, and it's a powerful way to sort of internalise the story, and you can kind of imagine what it's like to be him at this point in the book, and it's just a useful way to memorise and learn and internalise that journey that he makes.
An insane resolve possessed me. I would die and end it, and I would save myself even the trouble of killing myself. I marched on recklessly towards this Titan, and then, as I drew nearer and the light grew, I saw that a multitude of black birds was circling and clustering about the hood. At that, my heart gave a bound, and I began running along the road.
So we talked before about character and about nadir, 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 a low point for a character. And this has to be the very low point. He's been through some bad times with the curate and Ataliman and by himself. And yet here he is. An insane resolve possesses him. He decides to die and end it. And he won't even kill himself. He'll just walk towards the Martian fighting machine, and it'll kill him with the heat ray, or it'll crush him. So he's decided to end his own life, to leave his wife and end himself, because he feels there's no hope left. He feels there's nothing left in London. He thinks he's the only man alive. So it's a real low point. But almost as quickly as it hits him, he realises, as the black birds are circling round the hood, that this Martian is also dead and no longer alive. So the black birds, I mean, this is sort of the things that birds do. They circle around, don't they? Because they can pick up on the meat and the bits of food that are left. And so that's what's happening here.
I hurried through the red weed that choked St. Edmund's Terrace. I waded breast high across a torrent of water that was rushing down the waterworks towards the Albert Road, and emerged upon the grass before the rising of the sun. Great mounds had been heaped about the crest of the hill, making a huge redoubt of it. It was the final and largest place the Martians had made, and from behind these heaps there rose a thin smoke against the sky. Against the skyline, an eager dog ran and disappeared. The thought that had flashed into my mind grew real, grew credible. I felt no fear, only a wild, trembling exultation as I ran up the hill towards the motionless monster. Out of the hood hung lank shreds of brown, at which the hungry birds pecked and tore.
So we saw before that the dog running down the street near the Natural History Museum, down Exhibition Road, with the putrescent red meat. And here we've got the birds, hungry birds, picking at the lank shreds of brown meat that's hanging out of the hood. Because the Martian inside is dead, and even the birds are pecking away at the dead meat, the dead flesh. The oily, brown, leathery flesh. Delicious. Sounds a bit like haggis.
In another moment, I had scrambled up the earthen rampart and stood upon its crest. And the interior of the redoubt was below me. A mighty space it was, with gigantic machines here and there within it. Huge mounds of material and strange shelter places. And scattered about it, some in their overturned war machines, some in the now rigid handling machines, and a dozen of them, stark and silent and laid in a row, were the Martians. Dead. Slain by the putrefactive and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. Slain as the red weed was being slain. Slain after all man's devices had failed by the humblest things that God, in his wisdom, had put upon this earth.
Now, this is important. This is like the punchline of the whole book. So this section of the book is very, very important, and it's one that the examiners might well pick because, of course, it sort of defines the whole point of the book. So we learn how the Martians have been destroyed and they've been slain, and that word slain is used again and again at the start of each clause, and that's called anaphora when it appears at the start of a sentence. And that's a structural technique. So anaphora, A-N-A-P-H-O-R-A, anaphora. So slain by and that means killed, so an old-fashioned word for killed. Slain by the putrefactive and disease bacteria against which their systems were unprepared. So just bacteria that we don't even notice on Earth, that humans don't notice because we've evolved to be immune to these things. So little wee bacteria, the things that are all creeping and crawling all over our bodies all the time, all over our skin all the time, but we don't mind them because we're used to them. So even now, there's bacteria crawling across your eyes, even now as you listen to this. Bacteria in your mouth, on your tongue, on your hands, everywhere on your body there's a bacteria, but we don't mind because we're immune to them. But of course, the Martians are not immune to them. And so they're slain as the red weed was being slain. Slain after all man's devices had failed by the humblest things that God, in his wisdom, has put upon this earth. So you've got a technique called anadiplosis there, and I'll spell it for you in a second, but it's a structural technique. And it's when a word at the end of a clause, in this case the word is slain. So you get slain as the red weed was being slain, semicolon, slain after all man's devices had failed. So that word is at the end of the clause and then at the beginning of the next clause, and that's called anadiplosis. Just spell A-N-A-D-I-P-L-O-S-I-S. Anadiplosis. And it just repeats and emphasizes that word slain. And then the real crux here is that it's slain by the humblest things, the tiniest wee things. If you think back to that very first page of the book, the infusoria under the microscope, that's what's slain the Martians, the tiny wee bacteria. And these are the tiniest, simplest organisms on Earth that God, in his wisdom, has put upon this earth. So it's an anaphoric reference back to the very start of the book. In a way, that reference to the infusoria under the microscope was foreshadowing this all the time. And it was a clue. And this reference to God, after all the sort of godlessness in the book and the ineffectiveness of the curate, and the fact that the narrator loses patience with the curate and it causes his death, he recognises now that God, in his wisdom, had put these things on the earth, and it's these things that have saved them. So he's thanking God for creating these wee bacterial life that have destroyed the Martians. So at one point you might have thought this was a very atheist book, a very scientific book. But it's not the case, because actually he's thanking God here for creating all kinds of life, and even the simplest life that has destroyed the Martians. It's a very important point to get your head around. And it really is the crux of the book, that actually the things that we take for granted, the very bacteria under our noses, in our noses, as a matter of fact, are the things that can actually bring down a huge enemy like the Martians. It's a mind-blowing point to consider.
For so it had come about, as indeed I and many men might have foreseen had not terror and disaster blinded our minds. These germs of disease had taken toll of humanity since the beginning of things, had taken toll of our pre-human ancestors since life began here. But by virtue of this natural selection of our kind, we have developed resisting power. To no germs do we succumb without a struggle. And to many, those that cause putrefaction in dead matter, for instance, our living frames are altogether immune. But there are no bacteria in Mars. And directly these invaders arrived, directly they drank and fed, our microscopic allies began to work their overthrow.
Look at that language there. It's talking about it like a battle, isn't it? And these microscopic allies. It's a metaphor. And what a strange noise. And their overthrow suggests sort of a military attack. So we've got this scientific rationale here, which we're used to from H.G. Wells, and we're used to it from the narrator. He puts everything down to science and logic and rationale. And yet, this is very rational. This is very logical. He's talking about natural selection. He's talking about Darwinism and the fact that we've become immune to these things. So he's blending religion with Darwinism. And we have to remember that Darwin, in fact, let me just find out when Origin of Species was. I've got a framed extract in my wee office here that's taken from Charles Darwin, and it's an extract, and it's a lovely thing. The words are arranged in such a way that it makes up Charles Darwin's face, but it makes him look like a monkey. It's a lovely thing. Anyway, that was in 1859, so not too long before this book was written. It's certainly something which would have been talked about at the time this book was written, and lots of scientific progress was based upon it. So it's a nod to Darwinism, and yet it's also a nod to religion, and it's an interesting blend of the two disciplines.
Already, when I watched them, they were irrevocably doomed, dying and rotting even as they went to and fro. It was inevitable. By the toll of 1 billion deaths, man has bought his birthright of the earth, and it is his against all comers. It would still be his were the Martians 10 times as mighty as they are, for neither do men live nor die in vain.
A very important line there, a very important quote to take note of. For neither do men live nor die in vain. It's a socialist point he's making, that the earth belongs to man. Not just the British, but man. So he's making that point that the earth belongs to all of us. We've all evolved. We've all died and been naturally selected. And, you know, we're the survivors, aren't we? We're the strong ones. We're the ones who survive. The weak, they didn't make it. So we're the success story of natural selection. Those of us alive now to read this book and to be listening to this podcast and to be speaking the podcast. We're the lucky ones. We're the survivors. We're not the lucky ones. We're not lucky to have survived. We're just here because we've survived and have the strongest of genes. And so it's an interesting blend. And I think that's an important theme for this book, is that blend of atheism, but also with religion and science and rationale and Darwinism, all blended together. And that's sort of what the contemporary reader was thinking, because for the first time, really, they were having to face scientific answers to religious questions, and it was an interesting time. So it's definitely a big part of the themes of the book, and also the context of what an 1898 reader would be thinking about. Now, what that's called is called the zeitgeist, which Frank will know this is a German word, German phrase, which means, you know, spirit of the age, time of the age. Like Geist is ghost, isn't it? So like a ghost or spirit of the time of the age, or spirit of the age, I suppose. So what's in the zeitgeist? Well, in the zeitgeist of the late 1800s was Darwinism. That was in the zeitgeist. People were thinking about it, talking about it. But also people's conflict with religion was in the zeitgeist, and how religious they were and how they reconciled science and religion. That's what H.G. Wells is doing in this book, along with these messages of socialism, that actually the earth belongs to all of us, not just one empire. I'll spell zeitgeist for you as well, just in case, because you want to write that down, I would say. So Zeitgeist. So Zeit and Geist. And use the German spelling, so it's, because it's pronounced with the emphasis on the I, so Zeit and Geist, you want to put the I at the end, so after the E. So E-I, so Z-E-I-T-G-E-I-S-T, Zeitgeist.
Here and there, they were scattered, nearly 50 altogether, in that great gulf they had made, overtaken by a death that must have seemed to them as incomprehensible as any death could be. To me also, at that time, this death was incomprehensible. All I knew was that these things that had been alive and so terrible to men were dead. For a moment, I believed that the destruction of Sennacherib had been repeated, and that God had repented, and the angel of death had slain them in the night.
So, having just said what we've just been talking about religion, it's interesting he makes that religious reference here to Sennacherib. And worth just looking at the footnote there, number 3. But that the angel of death had come along, sort of a hand of God. Sorry, I'm reading this it's quite late at night now. I'm recording this and I'm ready for my bed. So he's talking about the angel of death as sort of a heavenly act of God that's come down to slaying these Martians. He feels like it's something biblical. But of course, it's not as grand as that. It's just the wee tiny things that have brought down the Martians. It didn't need a great big biblical intervention. God had put those wee bacteria on the earth anyway, and that's what's brought the Martians down. So the tiniest things. It's quite humbling. Humans couldn't do it, but the tiny bacteria, that could do it.
I stood staring into the pit, and my heart lightened gloriously. Even as the rising sun struck the world to fire about me with his rays.
More personification there, even of the sun. Everything around him he looks at, the London's personified, the sun's personified. Everything's alive, everything's real and alive, and he feels connected to the world. Reconnected to the world, I should say, because now the Martians are dead. He realises that he's not in danger, that the world belongs to him again. So he sees the world in a new way, and even the sun is personified. The rising sun struck the world to fire about me with his rays.
The pit was still in darkness. The mighty engines, so great and wonderful in their power and complexity, so unearthly in their tortuous forms, rose weird and vague and strange out of the shadows towards the light. A multitude of dogs, I could hear, fought over the bodies that lay darkly in the depths of the pit far below me. Across the pit, on its further lip, flat and vast and strange, lay the great flying machine with which they had been experimenting upon our denser atmosphere when decay and death arrested them. Death had come not a day too soon. At the sound of a cawing overhead, I looked up at the huge fighting machine that would fight no more forever, at the tattered red shreds of flesh that dripped upon the overturned seats of the summit of Primrose Hill.
So you've got the polysyndeton here of the mighty engines, about 10 lines down on page 169. The mighty engines, so great and wonderful in their power and complexity, so unearthly in their tortuous forms, rose weird and vague and strange. So rose weird and vague and strange, polysyndeton there. Because it's emphasised that the connectives that would and reinforces just how unusual these things are. And now that they're dead, how strange they are looking in this on Earth, on Primrose Hill. And then you've got the personification of death. Decay and death arrested them. So there's hendiadys there of decay and death. And then death had come not a day too, so personifying death had come not a day too soon. So this idea of death had actually come and got them not a day too soon. So personifying death. And then that graphic, hideous, grotesque image of the tattered red shreds of flesh that dripped down. And what an interesting verb that is, that dripped down upon the overturned seats on the summit of Primrose Hill. So the red shreds of flesh that dripped down, that verb dripped is particularly horrific, I think.
I turned and looked down the slope of the hill to where, enhallowed now in birds, stood those other two Martians that I had seen overnight, just as death had overtaken them. The one had died even as it had been crying to its companions. Perhaps it was the last to die, and its voice had gone on perpetually until the force of its machinery was exhausted. They glittered now, harmless tripod towers of shining metal in the brightness of the rising sun.
That reference against the rising sun, I suppose that's a symbolic reference to the starting of a new day. And we've seen that used before, where the dramatic tension, the start of a new day was not positive and not optimistic. It was another bad day. But now it's been used to show the start of a new time, a new age for humanity. A time of hope, a time of rebuilding humanity and rebuilding in a better way. That's the socialist part of the book, is that they've got a chance to rebuild themselves and be better versions of themselves. A wee bit like the lockdown, I suppose, that, we've had the time to take to look at ourselves and come back stronger and a better version of ourselves. We will be more kind and generous and compassionate after lockdown. I hope we will. Who knows? I'd like to think so, but, we'll see.
All about the pit, and saved as by a miracle from everlasting destruction, stretched the great mother of cities. Those who have only seen London veiled in her sombre robes of smoke can scarcely imagine the naked clearness and beauty of the silent wilderness of houses.
So that language technique, that the personification, the great mother of cities, personifying London as the great mother of cities, sort of emphasising how important London is. And of course we've known that all the way through. It's the epicentre of the book, and it heads towards the book, and it gives that sense of climax. So you've got language in the personification, but you've also got a sense of climax and the way in which this is sequenced towards the end of the book, that we find ourselves in London. So the language and structure working together to create that narrative climactic tension.
Eastward, over the blackened ruins of the Albert Terrace and the splintered spire of the church, the sun blazed dazzlingly in a clear sky. And here and there, some facet in the great wilderness of roofs caught the light and glared with a white intensity. It touched even that round store place for wines by the Chalk Farm station, and the vast railway yards, marked once with a graining of black rails, but red-lined now with the quick rusting of a fortnight's disuse, with something of the mystery of beauty. Northward were Kilburn and Hampstead, blue and crowded with houses. Westward the great city was dimmed, and southward, beyond the Martians, the green wash of Regent's Park, the Langham Hotel, the dome of the Albert Hall, the Imperial Institute, and the giant mansions of the Brompton Road came out clear and little in the sunrise, the jagged ruins of Westminster rising hastily beyond. Far away and blue were the Surrey Hills, and the towers of the Crystal Palace glittered like two silver rods. The dome of St. Paul's was dark against the sunrise and injured. I saw for the first time by a huge gaping cavity on its western side. And as I looked at this wide expanse of houses and factories and churches, silent and abandoned, as I thought of the multitudinous hopes and efforts the innumerable hosts of lives that had gone to build this human reef, and of the swift and ruthless destruction that had hung over it all. When I realized that the shadow had been rolled back, and that men might still live in the streets, and this dear, vast, dead city of mine be once more alive and powerful, I felt a wave of emotion that was near akin to tears.
Just notice there that the polysyndeton there of houses and factories and churches. So he's listing all the wide, he even mentions the wide expanse, and then uses polysyndeton to reinforce how wide and broad the vista is, the view of these houses and factories and churches. And then we get these syndetic lists, asyndetic lists I should say. The multitudinous hopes and efforts, the innumerable hosts of lives that have gone to build the human reef, swift and ruthless destruction. So this asyndetic list sort of suggests that all the work that's gone into building humanity and civilization, and the listing of all these things that have gone into making that, the time and effort that have gone into that. And he realizes now that the shadow's been rolled back. He's regained his world, his earth has come back to him, and he feels very emotional, as I'm sure you would, and I would too.
The torment was over. Even that day, the healing would begin. The survivors of the people scattered over the country, leaderless, lawless, foodless, like sheep without a shepherd.
That asyndetic list there as well, you've spotted, just to suggest the sheer numbers of people who are scattered about the country, leaderless, lawless, foodless, like sheep without a shepherd. And finishing with that simile, like sheep without a shepherd. People just running around, running pell-mell, as they used to say. Just kind of, chaos. And that asyndetic list just sort of increased that sense of how many people there are and how out of control they might be. And it's starting to heal, starting to reunite, and civilization can be built again, just like we will be after lockdown.
The thousands who had fled by sea would begin to return. The pulse of life, growing stronger and stronger, would beat again in the empty streets and pour across the vacant squares. Whatever destruction was done, the hand of the destroyer was stayed. All the gaunt wrecks, the blackened skeletons of houses that stared so dismally at the sunlit grass of the hill, would presently be echoing with the hammers of the restorers and ringing with the tapping of their trowels. At the thought, I extended my hands towards the sky and began thanking God. In a year, thought I. In a year. With overwhelming force came the thought of myself, of my wife, and the old life of hope and tender helplessness that had ceased forever.
So what a chapter that is, what a powerful chapter, and sort of really the book could end there quite well, I think. It's a powerful ending to the book. Just back up a little bit in that page 170 there. So whatever destruction was done, the hand of the destroyer was stayed. So personifying there's a metaphor, but personifying the hand of the destroyer. So the hand of the destroyer was stayed. Someone stopped the hand of the destroyer and stopped them doing any more damage. That being the Martians, of course. All the gaunt wrecks, the blackened skeletons of houses that stared so dismally at the sunlit grass of the hill. So this is all figurative language, it's imagery. Blackened skeletons of houses, it's a metaphor. And then personified them by saying they stared so dismally at the sunlit grass of the hill. So sort of personifying the houses as being dead things, but a sense that they'll be rebuilt, and that within a year it'll be back to normal, back to how it should be, and maybe even better than it was. And I think that's the sense of hope here that H.G. Wells, this is why this book gets called a socialist book, because it's sort of about reinventing society and reinventing humanity. And look at that, he thanks God again. So there's that religious overtone here of recognising the importance of God and the importance of faith and the importance of loving all God's creatures, because even the very smallest of God's creatures can be very powerful. And that's it for this chapter. So we're almost there. There's just 2 wee chapters left to go. Chapter 9 and chapter 10, both very short chapters. And that's it. We're almost there. See you later.